Greetings and welcome to another episode of Business Talk podcast. I'm your host Deepak from India. I'm delighted and honored to welcome Dr. Aaron Nurick, Professor Emeritus of Management and Psychology at Bentley University, as our distinguished guest on today's podcast episode. Dr. Aaron's professional work centers on applying psychological principles to the workplace with expertise in interpersonal relations, emotional intelligence, organizational change, and leadership. His research and consulting have been widely recognized with publications in leading journals such as Psychological Bulletin, Human Relations, Human Resource Management, Human Resource Planning, the Journal of Management Inquiry, the Organizational Behavior Teaching Review, Journal of Management Education, and the Harvard Business Review. Over the course of his distinguished career, Dr. Nurick has received numerous awards for teaching excellence, innovation, and scholarly contributions, including Bentley University's Gregory H. Damian Award for Lifetime Teaching Excellence in 2019, Honors Professor of the Year in 2019, Innovation in Teaching Award in 2013, and Outstanding Scholarly Contribution Award in 2012, among many others dating back to his first Damian Award in 1985. In this episode, Dr. Aaron Nurick offers thought-provoking insights drawn from his acclaimed book, The Good Enough Manager, The Making of a Gem, exploring the human side of management and what it truly means to lead with authenticity and empathy. So without further delay, let's welcome Dr. Aaron Nurick to the podcast. Dr. Aaron, it's an honor and privilege to have you join us today.
Well, thank you, Deepak. It's an honor for me to be here, and thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you. Dr. Aaron, the concept of good enough manager draws from the ideas of a good enough parent. How do you see this analogy resonating in today's workplace, especially with increased complexity and uncertainty?
Well, I came upon this idea a long time ago. Actually, this book it's a small book. It's only 160 pages, but it was a long time in the making in the sense that it took me a while to develop all of the ideas. And the good enough idea, the good enough parent, the good enough mother was a theory that I came across when I decided to augment my studies of organizational behavior and organizational psychology with psychoanalytic thinking. I had been inspired by some of my senior colleagues at other institutions, such as Abraham Zalesnik and at Harvard, and Manfred Ketz who was his student, who was now a recognized scholar, both of whom became actual psychoanalysts, in addition to being management professors and leadership professors. And so in the 80s, after I had gotten tenure at Bentley, I started down this path myself because I was just fascinated by psychodynamic, what is known as systems psychodynamic thinking. And one of the theories was from Donald Winnicott, D.W. Winnicott, whose main idea was this good enough mother, which can be extended to be good enough parent, of course, in modern times. And the general idea of that was that the parent forms something that is known in the earliest phases of life, interactions, when a child interacts with his or her parent. The parent creates something known as a holding environment. You know, the child, obviously, when they're an infant, they're physically held, right, and carried about. And when they become, when they start to grow, they are held psychologically. And it makes the child feel relatively safe and secure. It is what is known as a good enough facilitating environment, which means that it fosters growth. It enables a child to feel free enough and safe enough to explore the world and experiment and maybe make some mistakes and maybe get into a little bit of trouble and develop their creative ideas, all within the guidance of this facilitating environment that's created by the parent. So when I learned about that theory, it made a lot of sense for me. And I said, this could be transcribed to organizational life. This is kind of what an effective leader does, and especially in uncertain times like we are experiencing now, that the leader can create an atmosphere of, I will always say, relative safety. There's no such thing as 100% safe environment, but that they can create enough of what is known as a facilitating environment so that their employees can feel comfortable trying out some new things and not being fearful of making a mistake that their life is going to depend on if they make a mistake. I'll talk about that later. And so this notion that you don't have to be perfect, that the leader doesn't have to be perfect, and that fosters a sense in their employees that they don't have to be perfect. The whole idea is you can still strive for excellence, and you can be excellent and perform in an excellent way without the perfectionism that very often gets in the way of our thinking and creativity. I know that's a rather long-winded response, but that's my understanding of that concept, which is fundamental to the book.
Very insightful. Professor, from your research with over 1,000 respondents, what are the most consistent traits you have found in GEMS across industries and organizational contexts?
Well, I wanted to base this book on some kind of research. I didn't want to write a book that was just purely my own just ideas. I wanted my ideas to be um, tested out, if you will, by some research. So I created this study. And it wasn't a very sophisticated study. It was just I posted some things on a website, and I had people from alumni from my university in a confidential and anonymous way go to this site and write stories about the best managers and their worst managers as they define them. And, the things that kept popping up in this, I did a relatively, I collected, I got over 1,000 responses. That's actually 1,058 that I went through myself, and some were essays and some were just one or two lines, but um, it started to center around some central themes. And, I wouldn't call them traits necessarily, but they do have behavior patterns, that you might say, and attributes that were fairly consistent. And that is, they were seen as mentors. The best managers were seen as mentors. They were seen as teachers. They were experienced as teachers. They were also very good at building and maintaining relationships, developing relationships, and high functioning relationships with their employees. Um, and they also were people who I labeled them models of integrity. They were people that tended to do the right, what we would say, do the right thing. They had a high moral sense. They had a deeper sense of values in the decisions that they made. And so those three major themes, I mean, in the book, there's a whole list of things that came out. And with the worst managers, the term micromanager was used very, very often among the recipients, which makes a lot of sense. This is kind of the perfectionist that looks over your shoulder in many ways. Uh, is so detail oriented. Sometimes they lose sight of the overall objective. They're too concerned with the small details. And so they were often referred to as micromanagers. And so and they were just the opposite in many ways. They were people who did not have a sense of moral integrity all the time. They were also people who were very bad at maintaining relationships and building relationships. Most research centers around, I cite this study from the Center for Creative Leadership that said that when managers derail, right, when they fail, a lot of it has to do with faulty relationships, their inability to develop and maintain effective relationships.
Professor, you described GEM as mentors, relationship builders, and models of integrity.
Yeah.
Which of these qualities do you think is the hardest to cultivate and why?
Oh, that's a very, very good question. As one who is taught in the field of interpersonal relations, human relations for many, many years, 44 years at Bentley, full time. Um, and now doing, guest lecturing and things like that. I think the hardest thing, anybody can learn skills. You can read a book and you can learn to like 3 steps of better listening or, assertive communication. And, we call those competencies. Those are, I'm not saying they're easy to learn, but those are things that you can readily learn and practice over time. What you can't learn and practice over time is something that I call capacity. And that is the frame of mind, and it has to do with one's emotional intelligence, uh, your empathy, your openness, your willingness to um, reflect on experience. And again, these are things that can be developed. These are not things that are baked in with certain people and impossible with other people. But I think there would be the hardest, I think, to develop because I think those kinds of things develop over time as a person matures, in many ways. So you can encourage it. You can encourage empathy. You can help people learn what it is and how to make the most of their own. But ultimately, they have to be in a situation to practice it, along with the competencies. Whenever I taught the competencies, I said, you can learn the skills, but I said, if you don't have the attitude and you don't have the capacity, um, the reflective capacity that goes along with those skills, you're not going to be effective with them.
The second edition of your book addresses globalization, tribalization, and polarization.
Yeah.
How do these social and political shifts challenge the ability of managers to be good enough?
Well, it's that's a challenge to anybody. I wrote the book at a time. I wrote the book actually the first edition. I was working on it in 2008, 2009. The book was released in late 2010. It's a different world at that time, and we'll talk about that more later, probably. But I think what we see now, and it's gotten honestly, it's gotten more intense over the last number of years, particularly post pandemic. I mean, the pandemic certainly had a lot to do with the uncertainty and the polarization. And what tends to happen when people are in a situation of high uncertainty and high stress and anxiety, I think we underestimate the amount of anxiety that is just in the air, that just permeates so much of what we do and how we experience the world. And I think that's true with everybody. But I think with particular individuals, what we tend to do is to try to simplify the world as much as possible. And the way we do that, psychologists refer to it as splitting. We look at things in sort of an either or pattern. I think it's a way to manage one's anxiety because otherwise you are in this constant state of uncertainty and this constant state of not knowing what the next move is. So it gives people in some ways this false sense of certainty. And I believe with that, there's a lot of pressure on managers to provide answers, to be the one who knows, to be the one who um, just takes away the uncertainty in many ways. And I think that's the real challenge. And I think the good enough approach is just the opposite of that. The good enough approach, in many ways, I identified these kind of managers as people who tend to thrive in uncertain environments. That they're not daunted by the anxiety that they feel, and also they learn to manage themselves. And if they can, I often told my students, I said, if you can't manage yourself, you're not going to be able to manage others effectively. Um, so it certainly presents a challenge, but I think that's where the good enough manager ideas really come to the fore.
Technology and the gig economy have redefined work relationships. How can GEM principles apply when teams are dispersed, remote, or working on short-term contracts?
Okay. Well, the gig economy is a we've always had it, but it's certainly been identified more recently as a phenomenon when people take on contract work, when people take on part-time jobs, also, as you say, when people work remotely. I think it's a particular challenge because people can't see each other as much and form these kinds of relationships over time. You know, I'm a dinosaur in many ways that I was in the same work environment my entire career. You know, I loved being there. I loved the relationships that I formed. I still have relationships with students that I taught 40 years ago who are now in their 60s, that and colleagues that I've had for so many years, that you just develop these relationships in more temporary environments and remote environments. I think the manager leader has to go out of his or her way to develop the best kinds of relationships that they can, to reach out and try to get to know a person, even though they're only working with you for 9 months. It's not their fundamental career. It's not something that they're totally invested in. Um, and but I still think, even on a small level, I still think it can be done. I mean, that for example, even in my classes when I taught remote students, you know, and that was certainly true after the pandemic, even after the pandemic, you know, we certainly during the pandemic when we taught in an environment like this over Zoom. But even afterwards, when many students decided, my graduate students decided to stay on Zoom and they were remote, I didn't get to know them as well as I got to know, you know, students that showed up in my classroom on a regular basis. And I could talk to them out in the hallway. You know, we would just have casual conversations before and after class, and you get to know something about them. They still said that sometimes very simple things, for example, when I began class, I took the first 5 minutes or so and just said hello to everybody. You know, I mean, it seemed like second nature to me. I wouldn't wonder why in the world would anybody not say hello to somebody on the screen, but I guess they had professors who just appeared and started talking, you know, started lecturing right away. And so even that little exchange, just a good morning and how are you doing and where are you? I see you're, you know, I see you're outside, you know, where are you? Sometimes little things like that made a difference. So that's all part of this. That's all part of relationship building. But admittedly, these are more temporary relationships. They're not going to be as deep as the kind of relationship one forms over a period of time.
Dr. Nurick, you connect gem qualities to the right brain thinking of artists and creative professionals.
Yeah.
How can managers in more rigid, data-driven environment still tap into that creative and humanistic mindset?
Well, that's a great question. Thank you for asking. It, you know, even though, and again, this idea of right brain and left brain, it's a nice metaphor. It's not as clear cut as, you know, it's often presented. We use both sides of our brain all the time. Some people tend to lean a little bit more on the creative side, you know, more of the right hemisphere functioning, and some others more so on that. And then there are some organizational environments, as you speak of, organizational cultures that are more exacting, more data driven, more high pressure, that require, you know, answers, that require, you know, very, very precise work. At the same time, people in those environments can use and understand that there's an art to what they do. You speak to surgeons, you speak to people who are inventors, highly technical people, um, but they will also appreciate and understand, there is still an art involved in what they do, and they can draw upon some of the same creative energy that you would see in people that we label artists and people who are musicians, for example. There's a strong link. I happen to know a number of musicians. I'm a music lover. If anybody reads my biography, that um, I have relationships with the people for example, in the Boston Symphony Orchestra. They are highly technical and they know everything, you know, about their music. But at the same time, they have this other capacity to, you might just say, let go, to reflect on what they're doing. So even if you're working in a highly technical environment, you can still step back and reflect on the overall picture. How does what I'm doing relate to something larger? How does what I'm doing make humanity better? Certainly those that are in medicine and technology can do the same thing.
Professor, emotional intelligence is a central theme in the book.
Yes.
How have you seen the role of emotional intelligence in management evolve over the past decade?
Well, I think it's, I think that people have recognized, one of the things that I've observed is we see more popular articles, pieces that appear on LinkedIn, people writing, blogs, people writing things about emotional intelligence, and there are more books that have come out since Dan Goleman introduced the term to the general population in 1995 with his book Emotional Intelligence. Um, he was not the first, but he was the one who popularized it. People like Peter Salovey, who is the newly retired president of Yale, former president of Yale, was the actual researcher. He and his colleagues, David Caruso and Peter Salovey, were the ones that coined the term emotional intelligence in 1990. Since that time, it's just grown, and it's more central, I think, to people's thinking. I remember when I was teaching organizational behavior early on, and I was really teaching emotional intelligence. It just didn't have the label at the time. So when emotional intelligence came out, I said, "Oh, so that's what I've been teaching for the last 25 years." When the book came out, and it just gave a nice label to a whole series of things, a whole understanding of things that were happening interpersonally, emotionally, that part, and those things were somewhat discounted, I think, as soft, as not serious. And I think in the last decade, as you ask, I think it's taken on a new importance, and I think people have recognized it because I think people are more aware of their emotional life. And I think the anxiety that I spoke of earlier, the stress levels that people experience, I think they're looking for an understanding of that. And I think because of that, I think emotional intelligence has become more important and talked about more.
In turbulent and polarized times, managers may feel pressurized to prioritize short-term result over relationship building. How
Yeah.
can James balance these competing demands?
Well, you said the key word there, balance. Certainly, there are short-term objectives that everybody has to meet. And whether it's the quarterly report or the return to stockholders or whatever it happens to be, our tendency is to err too much in that direction, that we tend to focus more on the short term than the long term. um, I think in this environment that requires very quick thinking, quick turnarounds, instant analysis, that in spite of that, I mean, you still leaders still have to produce results. I mean, leaders still have to uh, you know uh, produce whatever it is they're working on, whether it's a tangible object or whether it's a set of ideas um, or a book. Um, there are short-term goals that everybody has to meet, but I think sometimes when we think about those short-term goals, we get lost because we're only thinking in the short term and just what I have to do in the next 3 months. And I don't see the connection between what I have to do then and the arc of whatever this project is. All projects sort of have a lifetime. And so what one of the jobs I think of the good enough manager, if you will, is to keep the larger view, and to take the larger view. And the only way you can do that is to step back. Um, and to, when I say step back, it means to just sort of take a moment. It doesn't take long. I'm not talking about hours here. I'm just taking a few moments to step back and say, okay, uh, it looks like we're on task. It looks like we're going to make the goal. Um, but also to question the meaning. All right, so we made it. So what? So how does this connect with everything else? And what now do we have to do in order to build on this result? So balancing the short term and the long term, I think, is a very crucial thing for all managers.
Professor, for aspiring managers, especially students, what are
Yeah.
the first practical steps they can take to move forward becoming a gem?
Work on your interpersonal skills. I would say that one of the things and one of the complaints that we hear these days, and I'm not going to, I'm not trying to generalize too much, but one of the things that we hear is that people have a harder time. I think it's because we don't have these enduring kind of relationships where so much can be unsaid, right? And we, human beings focus more actually on nonverbal communication than they do verbal. So the idea of relying on texts and emails and social media without the presence of other people, many people have said that our social skills, and we are by nature social beings. Uh, Elliot, the famous social psychologist Elliot Aronson, referred to human beings as social animals, and we are. We rely on other people. We depend on other people. It has a lot to do with our well-being. It even has a lot to do with our physical health and well-being. So I would tell aspiring managers and students especially, because obviously I'm a little biased because that's the area that I taught, but this stuff is important for you. This is the way, you know, your resume might get you hired. It won't get you promoted. What's going to get you promoted is your expertise, of course, but that's sort of taken for granted. If you don't have that, you don't have a job. But if in addition to that, what's going to move you on and move you on to the next level are your human skills, your interpersonal skills, your ability to create just comfortable social interaction. Some people say we're losing that, and some people say our empathy, our ability to focus on other people, is also dwindling. So we're kind of working against the tide here, and I think that's why people, when they see emotional intelligence or they see programs that are oriented around that, I think are attracted to them because I think they recognize the need.
Dr. Arun, I would like to conclude this episode with one last question.
Sure.
After revisiting your own work nearly a decade later, did your understanding of the good enough manager change in ways that surprise you?
Well, yes, I think. I mean, I still hold the same views about it in the sense that I think it's very important. The second edition now is almost 5 years old, and thank you for your interest in it, by the way. I'm working on a few other things. I'm editing the handbook. I'm editing a collection of chapters coming up on the research handbook of emotional intelligence from Edward Elgar, publishers in the UK. And so this idea that emotional intelligence at work and the good enough manager, still holds some interest. For me, I think maybe the surprising thing is, I didn't expect the world to change in some ways that it did when I first wrote the book. When I first wrote the book years ago, we were in a different place. There was sort of a greater sense of optimism. There was a greater sense of hope. There was a greater sense of comfortable interactions with other people. I'm not saying there was not the polarization. There's always been polarization, but it's just become so much more intense. And therefore, because of that, I think that the gem idea, the working for a gem, what I call a gem, a good enough manager, as the way I define it, as a teacher, as a relationship builder, as somebody who has high moral integrity, I think it becomes even more important. So I don't think I'm going to be writing a third edition of this book, but I do believe that if you read the introduction now, I think, as I say, the new introduction, I think these kinds of skills, I think the kinds of things that are mentioned in this book and brought about and explained are even more important now than when I first wrote it. And I think that's going to be true for a number of years coming. This stuff is needed more than ever now for just a whole range of reasons for human beings to be able to thrive in organizational settings. And that goes back to my first love of organizational behavior, which was established when I was an undergraduate at the University of North Carolina when I was studying business, and realized that business was okay, but I realized that I was not going to be an accountant or a finance person or a lawyer. When I took the course in organizational behavior, that's when I woke up in many ways and said, this is fascinating. And 50 plus years later, it's still fascinating to me.
Listeners, as we have heard today, the good enough manager isn't about striving for some impossible ideal, but about showing up with integrity, empathy, and a genuine commitment to the growth of others. Dr. Nurick's work reminds us that management is ultimately a human relationship, imperfect, adaptive, and deeply impactful. In a world of rapid change, polarization, and technological upheaval, the GEM approach offers a timeless yet timely guide for leading with both heart and skill. Thank you, Dr. Aaron Nurick, for sharing your insights, and thank you, our listeners, for joining us in exploring what it truly means to be a good enough manager. Thank you so much, Dr. Aaron Nurick, once again.
Oh, and thank you very much, Deepak. It's my pleasure.